So, welcome everyone to the 10th episode of Expert Speak, brought to you by creators of product. If you haven't joined the Slack community yet, please do so. Today, we are lucky to have with us the founder of Upraised, which is an upskilling platform designed to help you identify your key strengths and help you become a product manager. We welcome Mona Gandhi. Previously, Mona has extensive experience of building and growing products. She has worked with Airbnb for 7 years, and she was one of the early members in the team, and she led growth teams as well. She's also a mentor with 500 startups and works with a variety of other startups, helping them with their product growth, tech, and various other things. So I won't take too much of the time, and over to you, Mona. And thank you very much for taking out time to do this.
Thanks, Devaka. Thanks for having me. Really happy to be here. Happy to share my journey. Hopefully, I can share some of the secrets that can help us build world-class products from India. That's my objective and my secret mission of being here. Outside of that, we'll try to keep sort of the session, so the structure of the session be more conversational. So I'll kind of talk about my journey. Clearly, Airbnb has been a very big part of my professional journey. So we'll start with that and what made Airbnb special. And then I'll talk a little bit about Upraised, and we'll leave 25-30 minutes at the end for any questions. So, along the way, if you have questions, make note of them. We'll make sure to kind of address them at the end. Cool. So let's get started. So my name is Mona. So just kind of introducing myself, like Devaka said, I'm a founder at Upraised. Upraised is a full stack candidate focused upskilling platform, helping people do career transitions in product management. And I was just saying this a few minutes earlier. Product management is one of those chicken and egg problems where you don't get hired if you have no experience, but how do you get experience, right? So this is sort of the mission statement we want to solve for. Before this, I was at Airbnb. I was the first female engineer there. Actually, I've been the first female engineer at all the 4 startups that before Upraised, and I guess at Upraised too. It was, I started back in 2011 when the team was less than 30 people in total. We, kind of on my first day, built my own desk, bought my own computer, got started. There was no fancy onboarding as it is today. We were 8 engineers in total. So each of us kind of owned one vertical. I was just not out of my desire, but just out of my background, handed over what was then called acquisition, is now called growth. So sort of started doing acquisition. The primary problem statement I was solving was how do you balance the marketplace? So how do you make sure that at any given point we have enough supply to cater the demand, and if we have enough demand, we have the supply to sort of fulfill that. So that was my core, OKR. Did that for about 2.5 years, then moved into product management at Airbnb, did that for 2.5 years, and then moved into business sides of things, sort of between product and legal PR, helping grow our footprint in Asia Pacific. It's been a long journey. I've done a little bit of everything kind of at Airbnb. It has been one of the most professionally fulfilling journeys. I really thought that I would actually retire at Airbnb. It was just one of those fantastic companies that you really have no reason to leave. But then I came across a really interesting problem statement, and that's what I'm trying to solve at Upraised. And so before Airbnb, I was at Apture, which got acquired by Google. Before that, I was at social media. Even that went through an acquisition with Living Social, and then at 6apart, which also got acquired by Video Egg. So in a lot of ways, I've sort of had a very special career in the sense that every startup I fairly joined very early on, and they've all sort of seen exits. I've been super fortunate, and I think that for the thing that I'm most proud about is the kind of people that I've got to work with, and sort of what I got to learn from them. So that's what I'm going to share, mostly focused on Airbnb, because I think most of my learnings have come from my professional journey at Airbnb. So I'm going to kind of share that right now. And then we'll talk a little bit about Upraised and go from there. Cool. So let's talk about the Airbnb story. I think a lot of, sort of just setting the stage in terms of where we are today. this was nowhere close to my wildest imaginations when I joined. Actually, when I joined in the first week after joining, we had the worst trust and safety case in Airbnb. I was stuck in the office for 4 days, and we were all like scampering to get some of these product features out. So if you showed me the slide deck on the day I joined, I would have definitely said these are hypothetical numbers that somebody is bullshitting to get me to join. There is no way I would have believed any of this, but here we are. It's all reality. It's all live. It's almost become a verb now. People, say things like I'm Airbnb it. We have 7 million Airbnb listings in the world. There are 100,000 plus cities which have Airbnb listings. Until I was at Airbnb, I did not even know that there were 220 countries. So that's how many countries we are in. We are at 750 million guest arrivals. So which means that 750 million people have stayed there, stayed in an Airbnb at some point in their life. If you ask Brian today, he still thinks he's just scratching the surface. The mission statement of the company is we want to build Airbnb is a place where everyone can belong, and because there are 7.2 billion people, 750 million is just scratching the surface. So we want to build a company where everybody can belong, right? A place where people feel that sense of belonging. So how did we get there? It all started in 2007 when Joe and Brian sort of needed to pay for their rent. So they were thinking of renting their airbeds for a design conference. And 3 guests just magically showed up because all the hotels were booked out and hotels were expensive. Out of the 3, one was an Indian designer, Amol, and they all kind of slept on airbeds. And what made the experience really special was Joe and Brian were themselves designers. So they felt a sense of connection. They all woke up in the morning. What was also special was, unlike hotels, you got like really nice breakfast. The host took you around the city. So you got to learn so much more about the city, right? If you live in a hotel, you're just kind of all by yourself, especially when you go to conferences, it's very boring. The idea sparked the imagination, and they said, okay, let's try to actually scale this and launch this at another conference called South by Southwest. So the initial thought process actually was to just kind of launch a service which was centered around events, because there was scarcity of places. There was just a sudden influx of people coming from all over the world, and there was a scarcity of hotels that could actually cater to that demand. And so the objective was, let's target every event after event after event and try to provide alternate accommodation. But the challenge with events is, once the events end, there's no demand, there's no money. But you still have to run the company, you still have to build the product, you still have to build everything. So your operation cost is still there, right? And so there came that trough of sorrow where no demand, no business, stagnant growth, and completely running out of money. But Brian, Joe, and Nate are like true hustlers. They actually, this was in 2008, which was a historic election in the US. It was the first time a Black president got elected. Just because the name was Air, Bed, and Breakfast, they said, okay, you know what? So we've done enough in Air, Bed, and Bed because of the events. Well, let's try to do something with the breakfast. And so they came up with this cereal box called Obama O's and Cap McCain's. And it was nothing but repackaged cereal, but they designed this whole packaging themselves. They even designed a jingle to go with it. This creative process got them to actually get a lot of PR. And from that PR, they started selling these boxes on Airbnb.com. And they made $30,000 to help them survive for the next 3 months. So they bought cereal at $4 a box and they sold it at $40 a box because of just repackaging it and redesigning it and being creative about it, and most importantly, sort of being a serial entrepreneur. And this is the hustle that actually got them into YC, which is actually the turning point for the company. And then when they were at YC, one of the things that Paul Graham said that kind of stuck with them was, actually it was not Paul Graham, but Paul Buchheit, who's the creator of Gmail, who once told them that it's better to have 100 users that love you than 1,000 users that kind of like you, right? And so he said, find those 100 people that love you. Where are most of your hosts? And he's, Brian's like, they're all in New York. So he's like, go to New York, go door to door, talk to them, try to understand why they like their product, why they like your product. So they actually went door to door. but it's really awkward in the US to actually show up to anyone's house. And so they said, we're offering free professional photography, and someone will come to your house and they'll actually photograph it. So they just showed up as photographers. And then they actually rented professional photography equipment, showed up there, took the photos, and then grabbed a beer with the host, and like actually tried to understand and demo the product, try to understand what they liked, what they didn't like, and that was the turning point of Airbnb. Then comes 2011. That's when I joined, and like I said, that we had the largest trust and safety situation, in the first week of me joining, and somebody's house got vandalized, which is why a lot of hosts got very antsy about putting their places up on Airbnb, and so we really had to scamper to figure out how to actually build this trust. We were a really small startup. There was no underwriter who would actually give us a guarantee of a 50K host guarantee program, like an insurance program. But we somehow figured it out. Actually, the night before it was going to launch, the conversation that we had with the underwriters was actually 5,000 host guarantee program. But Brian's like, that doesn't feel right. 5,000 doesn't cover anything. We're just going to add a zero. And he just overnight added a zero. And we announced it. And we then had to go back to the underwriter to talk about how do we actually do this. So lots of things happened around it, but this was one of the key moments when we started to focus a lot on trust and safety, and that went a long way in the history of how Airbnb has been built. Then came 2012, 2015, things started to scale. 2012 was an important point. We got to 1 million nights in Jan, 10 million nights. We hit 1 million night in Jan, but that was the inflection point. And it took 5 more months for us to get to 10 million nights because we opened 12 international offices. The biggest, the most important network effect in Airbnb is the cross-pollination of guest becoming a host and a host becoming a guest. So, most people started at guest and they traveled abroad or they took a trip. And when they went abroad, we would send them a message saying, hey, like when you're going abroad, why don't you become a host? Because it'll help you pay for your vacation. Because anyways, your home is empty. And so they became a host too. So we actually solved the two sides of the marketplace by actually helping cross-pollination of the roles that a single individual would take on the ecosystem. And that's how we went from 1 million nights to 10 million nights. Then we launched the Android app. We launched in Cuba. We localized a bunch of brand campaigns. So if you can imagine, in 2012, we were at 1 million nights in Jan. In 2017, we were at 300 million guests, right? So that's just a dramatic hockey stick growth. And that just came with a lot of localization, a lot of growth challenges that were completely unforeseen. But super interesting problems to solve. So out of my sort of, 7 years at Airbnb, I'd say there are a few key ingredients that made, if I kind of reflect back, there's actually 5 key ingredients. And these are the ones that I'm going to share with you today. Hopefully this gives you, some insights or some action items you can go back and actually apply to your own products. So let's kind of talk about what it took to build Airbnb in the early days. So ingredient number 1 is understand the value your product creates for the end user. I think there are very few people and companies that actually spend the time to understand not just what they offer, but how does their offering change or address the problem that the user is facing. Right? So these are 2 different lenses to look at. You can keep obsessing about making your offering better than your competitor. You can keep obsessing about making your offering more price sensitive. You can obsess about making your offering more design friendly, more UI friendly. But that's one lens to look at it, and that's what most of the companies end up doing. But a very important lens that if you appreciate are understanding the application of what you build to how it actually solves the problem that the user is facing, right? And if you have the ability to kind of connect these dots, there is a lot you can learn and a lot you can build that is a unique differentiator that a lot of your other competitors will never be able to do. Because this is actually a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of patience, it takes a lot of focus, and it takes a lot of perseverance. And I think these are the 4 qualities that kind of differentiate between great companies and okay companies. So if you look at the Airbnb story, you look at the Amazon story, you look at the Microsoft story, you look at Facebook story, it all boils down to this one single key principle, which is how is the user using my product and how is it solving the problem, rather than what is it that I am building, and not obsessing about a feature set just because you have to be better than your competitor. And along this, I just mentioned, one of the core things that few companies kind of, you know, almost become obsessive about is finding those 100 people that love your product, right? Somehow we've been trained, especially in the last 3 or 4 years, to kind of constantly be thinking about scale. It's like, oh, if you don't have 1 million users, you don't have 100 million, valuation, like your value with the company is not really worth anything. Like, why even do this, right? But I think how you get to these first 100 customers actually changes how you get to the next 10,000 and the next million and the next 10 million, because the first 100 actually set the tone of who you are as a company. They help you understand what your differentiator is. They help you build this competitive advantage that not a lot of other companies have. And most importantly, they become your biggest brand ambassadors. This is the best form of growth you can ever get. And so I think it is a very underappreciated way of thinking, which is to kind of focus on the first 100 people. Uh, uh, and especially in tech, because in tech, we are just all trained to think at scale. We are all trained to think about, the number 100 is rarely in anybody's Excel. It always starts with 1 million or 10 million or 50 million, right? And every investor deck you go to or investor presentation you have, it's like, okay, I'm going to make billions, right? It never is about, okay, if it's 10,000 users, this is not even a business I want to sort of think about. But as a company, if you don't understand what the core of your offering is, it's very difficult for you to actually build on it. So I think this is one of the most important ingredients that I think a lot of the great companies have gotten right, that more people should pay attention to. And so let's kind of talk about how Airbnb did it, right? So these are the three key things that we did. The first is, like I said, Brian and Joe kind of showed up as professional photographers for every one of our hosts in New York City. We had 44 hosts in New York City. They went door to door to every single host. And they demoed their product, they got feedback, they understood what their needs were, they understood, hosts were of all different ages. They had different levels of tech sophistication. They understood where their app was falling short. They understood where challenges in pricing were. They understood where challenges in product description were. Like, when you as a host who's 55 years old has an empty house and go on Airbnb, there are a lot of things that you don't know how to use because the person building the product is actually a 22-year-old. They have no understanding of what the tech gap between them and a 55-year-old is. So unless somebody tells you this explicitly, you're going to miss a lot of things that you would have never imagined. So they got insights that sitting in their office, they just would not have ever imagined. The second is, through the early days, there was a sense of constant dog fooding. Okay, and the purpose of dog fooding is every single person building the product should be using the product, and only then can you understand both the pain points of where the friction still exists, as well as the joys of what is actually working for you, right? So what are these delightful surprises that work for you? And one of those areas was actually payments in the ecosystem of Airbnb. In the very early days, we actually didn't have payment integration to take payments online. So we used to actually exchange cash when the guest would show up at the host house. And there would always be this, like, this tension between the host and the guest. It's like the host would imagine that the guest would give them money, but the guest would have never had the exact change. And so the host would be like, okay, I'll give it to you tomorrow. Or the guest doesn't have cash and they'll be like, oh, I'm in a new country, I don't have cash in this currency, I'm going to go get it tomorrow at 8 a.m. And then until tomorrow, the relationship between the guest and the host is very awkward. It's like, who's this stranger? He's not even paid me. I don't know what I'm doing here. Should I let him stay? So there's all this awkwardness was taking them away from the core experience that we wanted to give them, which is a sense of belonging, right? The sense of connection between the guest and the host, for you to feel the sense of comfort that you know somebody in an unknown city, which is what Airbnb was all about, was building these connections. And so we actually spent almost 6.5 months six and a half months at a startup, which is only 2 years old and only has 200 bookings, is a very long commitment to make, right? But we decided that we wanted to do it because that was something that was so core to our experience, that if we didn't take it out, we would never be able to actually see the impact of building these connections. So So that was the second thing we did. And then the third thing was we kind of positioned ourselves as an alternate form of accommodation for those looking to explore neighborhoods where hotels didn't exist. This was another key insight that we got when Brian and Joe kind of went to different hosts. A lot of these hosts actually in New York City, for those of you who know New York, most people live in Manhattan. When they go travel to New York, right? So they go see Times Square, like the standard, Madame Tussauds, museum, and like just things around there, right? But look, most of the hosts that hosted on Airbnb actually had apartments in Queens or Brooklyn or Bronx, which are not traditional neighborhoods where people go and explore as tourists. And so we realized that this is where our supply was, this is where our strength was. And what we actually did was actually position to that strength and saying like, hey, look, if you are somebody who just wants to live in this, in the touristy neighborhoods, like we're not the right fit for you. But if you are somebody who's an adventurer, who likes to explore and who wants to know the culture of the place and the authenticity of the place, go live in neighborhoods where tourists don't live, right? So be different. And that gave them bragging rights. It's like, hey, like I went to New York and I actually checked out like Brooklyn. I don't think anybody even knows what Brooklyn is. And so people started sharing these hidden spots of where to go in the city. And that's how this word of mouth started flowing. The second ingredient is trust. Trust is super important. Trust in your product is the greatest retention hack one can ever have. It's also one of the most underappreciated and not clearly understood. I think people try to complicate trust a lot. In my opinion, trust is just consistency over a long period of time. If you, whatever that promise is, whether your promise is that you're a great product, or your promise is whether you're an average product, or whether your promise is an above average product, or or a bad product, as long as you consistently remain bad or consistently remain average or you consistently remain above average, you have built that trust. People know that they will come and they will use, and this is what they will get in return, right? And so for us, we said, okay, every single Airbnb stay has to be of a certain quality. And, everything we did around trust was to ensure that that promise always held true. Uh, and, and sort of hold ourselves to that highest standard. And then because of that, we started to realize that people just started to believe in the brand, even though it was one of those whacked out ideas. Like, who wants to open a house to have a stranger live in them, right? It just doesn't make sense. It seems very obvious right now, but if you thought about this in 2010, I don't think anybody would have imagined it to be as big as it is. But it's literally built on the pillars of trust. It's literally because of trust that this ecosystem exists. And so we actually had to do a lot of things around trust. And I think this is, again, one of the pillars, which is as every brand, whether it is Airbnb or whether it is Amazon or whether it is Facebook or whether it's WhatsApp, like, what do you like about WhatsApp? It's just a pipe of communication. But the thing that's magical about it is it consistently works. It just, the message every single time gets delivered. If WhatsApp goes down, people are shocked because they're not used to it. Like, it's like, oh my God, it's not like if you can't WhatsApp for 30 seconds, it's like your blood's going to stop flowing, but you just get stressed about it, because that's the standard they've set themselves for. So how do we do that at Airbnb? First is, like I said, what you see is what you get, always, every single time. Every single listing on the platform until we were at 1 million listings had verified photographs. So we actually sent a professional photographer to your house to take a photo with an unbiased view. And this is one of those things, right? Like, when you are the owner of the house, you think your house is the prettiest one, right? Like, you have done a really good job. You're very emotionally attached to it, but you don't show the things that are not good about your house. For example, you'll never show if the bathroom isn't the size it should be, or you wouldn't show that if you don't have the clean towel set up. So we actually send a professional photographer to have an unbiased view on these things, so that every single time a guest showed up to your house, they knew what they were going to get. There were no surprises around it. The second was we actually built one of the most sophisticated trust and verification pipeline. So we actually verified every single user on the platform, whether it's a guest or host. For example, in India, we do like address checks, we do criminal checks, civil justice at every level for every guest, every host. We now even do it for, I think, like support staff in somebody's house. So we've gone above and beyond. This is a large chunk of cash that the company puts out to do all these services. But we think that trust is more business, and it's totally worth putting that money in there. And then third is the sense of being partners to every city, every local government, and every law and enforcement agents, right? So that we can actually maintain safety at the highest levels possible, right? So as you can imagine, like, two strangers living in one house, a lot of stuff can go wrong, from very small things to very, very, very bad things. And so how do we protect against those? So it's not something we alone can solve, but every law and enforcement agency actually has this mandate. So how can we actually enable them to help us when there is need? So we actually went above and beyond. We created like an SOS button. There's a whole protocol. Like we actually work with the governments on a day, on sort of a quarterly basis to understand what their needs are. Can we build tech for you? So make it easier, stuff like that. Number three, aligning on core values is better than aligning on capability of your team. What does this mean? It's great to have a lot of smart folks and the smartest folks, but it is greater to have folks who are aligned on the value system, because at any given point in time, you're going to have to make trade-offs. You're going to have to make tough decisions, whether it's on policy, whether it's on product, whether it is on hiring, whether it's on firing. But if you don't align on value systems, you can make a lot of conflicting choices. And what happens in conflicting choices, the classic khichdi, right? Nobody knows why you're here. Nobody has any loyalty towards what you're building. Nobody has any understanding of, why these choices were made. And this is how this whole idea of like, अच्छा ये फाउंडर ने आज कुछ सुबह ब्रेकफास्ट में कुछ अलग खाया होगा, इसके लिए उसका मूड कुछ अलग है आज. So if this is what is happening in your company, then basically there is no alignment on core values, because there's no understanding on how these decisions are made. At Airbnb, core values were embedded in every aspect of the company decision. So literally, if you had a product priority that you wanted to get prioritized to the top, you had to tell them why what about that product priority helped with the core values. So which of those core values was it touching, and why is it important to do it now? Team building, hiring, every single person was tested for each of the core values in the hiring process. Benefits, for example, like free lunches, happy hours. One of our core values was to be scrappy. Be a serial entrepreneur. We used to do lunch. We used to do happy hours, and we used to call, some of the newer wineries or the newer ice cream shops to kind of come tell us their story. So help others, be a host, be a serial entrepreneur. So it was everywhere. It was in everything you did. Everyone knew it, and everyone was reminded of the core values on a daily basis. Like the words that the core values were written in a colloquial form where everybody used it for everything they had to explain. And because they used it every day, it was just ingrained in you. It was just, it never left you. It was not something that had to be like on posters on the walls that every once in a while, some outsider comes and say, oh, that's a cool poster. And then you're like, oh yeah, this is one of our core values. It never happened to us. It was in us all the time. And then third is, this is something that I don't know how many of you know, but Brian, Nate, and Joe, every single one of them interviewed every single candidate that was hired on the team until we were the size of 500 people. There were many agonizing moments in there where we were like, dude, we need this guy yesterday. Like, we can't wait till Brian comes back from whichever office he's gone to. But they just never made any discounts. They were like, we're not going to let anybody onto the company unless each of us have tested them for core values, because that is very, very important to them. And I think that's one of the key things that I've kind of taken away from it. I think it's a very important virtue, because it's harder to hire, but it's 10 times harder to fire. Because when you fire, not just the person leaves, but the morale of the people that are left behind also has a large impact, right? So you have to be very mindful about who you hire and how you hire. Ingredient number 4, when in doubt, rely on data. It is, if I were to say from a growth perspective, what was the thing that actually led to this hockey stick, graph, I think is the investment we did in actually building the single source of truth that was accessible to the entire company. Everybody knew what metric we were talking about, what was the terminology of that metric. They knew where the metric was moving. Was it going up? Was it going down? There were like screens of like basic metrics all around the office. Every conversation in product started with a metric dashboard. It was very important. And Brian always encouraged this thought of like, hypothesis can be gut driven, but conclusions can't be without experiments. So you can tell me that this is how I feel and this is where it can go, but you can't tell me that it is going to be 10x in 3 months without doing any experiments or having data to prove that. And that actually put a very high quality bar on what ideas got prioritized, because people had to experiment first, validate, only then they could actually get more resources on it. So how did we do it? Like I said, the teams, one of the key differences at Airbnb was how the teams were structured. So the teams were not structured as product, eng, or design. Every team was organized. Every initiative had a combination of people, which had engineers, 3 to 4 engineers, one designer, one product manager, and one data scientist. And the idea of having one data scientist allocated to every initiative is there can never be an excuse that data science team has too much on their backlog and they can't tell us where we are going or how we're doing or cannot run enough experiments. So we always had this grouping together. And in a lot of ways, this felt very, it's like, I mean, it's almost like running a tiny little product startup inside every company, right? So everybody felt the sense of ownership to wanting to actually get it done. The second is we invested a lot in actually building experimentation frameworks. And this was almost a 2-year process. So we've actually had, at Airbnb, there's actually an experimentation infrastructure team that is all focused on building the framework that enables you to run hundreds of experiments at the same time. And not just running hundreds of experiments, but having confidence in the results set, so that they're not overlapping, that they're not like dissecting into the wrong segments, that we're not looking at results that we are not confident about. So things like that. So that actually, I would say from a growth perspective, was something we built around 2013. And if you look at the chart, that implementation was actually a direct correlation to us gaining a lot of runway on the international front, because sitting in San Francisco, we could run hundreds of experiments, even if we didn't have a full understanding of that geography, and we could learn really quickly. And most importantly, experimentation was celebrated. Like, it was, if you did an experiment and you learned something that we didn't know before, like you were like the hero that was talked about in the entire office. It didn't matter if that experiment failed or flunked or like it was terrible, but if you learned something from it, it was something that was talked about. We actually had little posters put out on like the walls there saying, this is what we learned, this is what we learned. And it was like, everybody was, talking about you. So you were so enthusiastic to want to actually do lots of experiments. Ingredient number 5 is the fifth one. This is the last one, I think, which is one of the most important ones, which is think about the ideal experience and kind of work backwards from it, right? Again, this is also one of the things that not a lot that as tech people, we just aren't trained to think. We always think when we have an idea, the first thought that crosses our mind is this scalable? Is this doable? Like, is it too manual, right? And the minute that thought crosses your mind, your first reaction to it is like, yeah, we can't do this for more than 10 people. Why even try? But what ends up happening is when you don't try that way, you never understand what the ideal way of solving this problem is. Even though it may not be scalable, you may actually learn a lot of insights on how to make these trade-offs to make it scalable. And so don't let go. Like, build some ideal experiences, understand what it is, and kind of work backwards from it. Like I said, every big initiative was unscalable at the onset, but we tried to scale it. Involve your users every step of the way with a genuine intent of learning more about your pain points, and then send updates of your products to ones that help you make it better, right? They will be your strongest and proudest supporters. And I think very few companies actually do that. And I think at Airbnb, this was one of the most phenomenal kind of achievements we kind of had. So this is sort of, everything that I learned at Airbnb. This is sort of my journey so far. So what am I doing now with all that I learned at Airbnb, right? It's been good 7 years. Like I said, I don't think I ever imagined there would be life outside Airbnb and I was just going to retire. But every once in a while, you kind of bump into a problem statement that gets you really, really excited. And I was super fortunate to have bumped into that again, the 5th time. And the problem statement I'm trying to solve is building an upskilling platform. It's called Upraised. It's a play on words on appraisal. So it's Upraised. We're a full stack platform. We're focused on career transitions into product management. Career transitions can come in many forms. It can be a first time PM. So you've never been a PM. You come from either engineering or marketing or accounting and you want to become a PM. The second is, you can also want to become a PM from, you were a PM in a B2B or a B2C segment and you want to transition to the other side. Or you want to, you've been an APM and you're kind of stuck now. How do you actually grow into becoming a PM or a senior PM, right? And we think of career transitions as each of these things. So we kind of focus on all of these. So just a little bit sort of journey on how did I even bump into this problem statement, because this is totally out of my forte. I have no recruiting background. I have no skilling background or ed tech background. I've always kind of worked in, so travel hospitality was one, social is another, APAC was in Google search, like, so I kind of built the recommendation system and all that. So ed tech is not something I've done before. Recruiting is also not something I've done before. But I kind of bumped into this problem statement because I was advising a bunch of different startups, as Divakar mentioned, as part of the 500 Mentor Network. I was also advising a bunch of YC startups. And I realized that everybody has a hiring problem. And this hiring problem is very unique because everybody that is in the job market looking for a job feels there's no good jobs available. Everybody that is hiring feels there's no good candidates available. And so I'm just like, how is this even possible? And if you ask people where the lack of talent is, it's typically tech. And if you look at the numbers, there's 3 million people that graduate every year. 1.7 million of them are engineers. So how can tech be a problem? So that's something that like really intrigued me. And I started kind of peeling the onion. I did about 127 1-hour conversations with candidates of all types. So people that are not even graduated to like 10 years of experience. I did about 72 meetings with 72 companies. So I actually talked to like what their hiring processes are, what, how long does it take, where does it fall, like who takes the decision, where, what types of tools and services do they use, all that kind of stuff. I shadowed about 6 campus hiring seasons to try to understand how like people get placed. I started to realize that campus recruiting is one of the key drivers of how people end up at companies that they still are at 2-3 years, right? And that sort of is a very key point in one's career. And so I sort of shadowed 6 campus hiring sessions to understand what happens there. And then after 3 months of market research between India, China, and US, actually I had an intern from China fly. We had never met. I just found her through my Airbnb network. And she showed up here in Mumbai, and we spent 3 months sitting in WeWork, trying to understand, how is this problem statement not solved in India yet? And are there companies in China and the US that are already doing this? We spoke to, the founder, the head of LinkedIn India. We spoke to Naukri. We spoke to a lot of companies in the middle. We spoke to a few companies in China, lots of them in the US. And we kind of realized that everybody's DNA is slightly different. So there are 2 types of companies. There's companies that just do learning, which is the Coursera and the Udemy's of the world, and there's companies that just do hiring, which is LinkedIn's of the world and Naukri's of the world. Actually, the magic happens at the intersection of the two, which is when you can upskill yourself for a specific role, right? And that's what's completely lacking in the market, which is why transitions are so hard. And so that's the problem statement we started focusing on. So like I said, but what convinced me to actually start Upraised, number one was impact. I think it truly changes the trajectory of what an individual can achieve. Because once you make a transition to something you love, like what you do and what you can achieve is just completely different than being stuck, right? Being stuck just completely sucks. And like if you look at my own journey, there's a compounding effect of just being lucky in this first second job, and my career trajectory has been very different than a lot of my other friends. The third is first principles thinking. So after having all these conversations and all this research, I realized that actually the biggest problem in the job market is skilling. If you can up the quality of the candidates, all the tools and technology that we currently have that is making billions of dollars is actually making the hiring process and the discoverability of talent and filtering this talent. These are the 2 core value propositions, but they would not even be a problem if the quality of the candidates was upped, right? If we fixed the candidate quality. And so it's a very hard challenge to solve. It's a very candidate focused challenge to solve. But that's also where my strengths lie. I'm a very consumer tech person. That's been my experience. And so I thought, why not just give it a try and see where we end up. So how does Upraised help a candidate? We do 3 key things. The first is know yourself. This is a test we've designed ourselves with the help of the standards set by Google, Airbnb, Uber, and Zomato. So we've actually tried to understand how people evaluate product managers and what skill sets are important. And we've tried to test for those. So we built our own test. It's free. Try it out. The only objective, this is a judgment-free zone of learning about yourself, which is why the test is even called Know Yourself test. This is not a test we automatically submit to recruiters. It doesn't go anywhere. It is just for your consumption. It is for you to know where your strengths and weaknesses lie, where you should focus your effort and what you should get good at and what you're already great at. most importantly. The second is put a focused effort. We help you put a focused effort on bridging skill gaps for the jobs you want to apply instead of generic coursework, right? So it has a success outcome. It has an outcome of you're not just learning just because you want to know the lingo. You're learning because you actually want to transition and get a job. And which is the third value proposition, which is we go beyond scalability. We also think about hireability, right? There is two aspects. One is, you know, the skills, and the other is you can actually get a job at a company that you want to be at. And so the platform actually guarantees you a job. Otherwise we put all your money back. And this guarantee is actually challenging us to do the best job we can to keep up to our promise to actually help you transition. Because it's easy for us to kind of chicken out and say, hey, like, we taught you everything, now it's up for you to go get a job. But if we can't get you a job, then our promise is not true, right? And so we are forcing ourselves to give all the money back if we can't get you a job, right? So our incentives are aligned. What keeps us going? Like I said, these are amazing stories of people that have actually transitioned, and that's what makes all of this worthwhile. We've been around for only a year. We are a very small startup. We're a team of 10 people, but small but mighty, and geographically diverse. So we 5 of us in Mumbai, few of us in China, and then a few of us in US. Our ambition is to be a global company. We care a lot about diversity, both in terms of perspective as well as gender. We've been super lucky to have a lot of initial success. These are a few stories that I'm sharing. This girl, she's from Patna. She did her engineering. She hated it. She only did engineering because she did well in her 12th grade, not she wanted to be an engineer. So right after engineering, she decided to do MBA so that she can wash off all the sins of engineering. But somehow landed as an ad sales partner in Udaan from her campus recruiting, and she really struggled. And within 8 weeks, we were able to transition into Zeta as an APM. Same with Arvind. He's a BTech. He started as an early member at Ninja Cart, but his role was more logistics focused, and he wanted to be closer to product. In about 10.5 weeks, we were able to have him transition into an APM at Simple, which is a very product-driven company. Karthik is actually an interesting example because he is IIM Calcutta, Anna University, great credentials, worked at Amazon, which is also great, but he hated his job because the ops manager is so far from product, and he was really, really struggling. And he was actually, the credentials worked against him because he had all these credentials. People were like, why haven't you already gotten a PM job? There is something wrong with you. And so he really struggled to kind of break out of that. And with Upraised, we were actually able to help him not start as an APM, but start as a product manager directly at Freshworks. So we've had some interesting, amazing success early on. Again, very early days. We've only been around for, actually June 27th will be our 1 year anniversary. So we're not even full 1 year yet. But here we are. This community is great. Give us this is literally the feedback that we're looking for. You can check us out at upraised.co. And most importantly, share your feedback with me at mona@upraised.co. Happy to kind of, I'd love to hear what you have to say. I'm pretty sure you guys can all relate to this problem statement, and so the feedback will be super valuable. Cool.
So I think this has been great. The stories from Airbnb and the things that you're doing at Upraised are superb. All the 5 points that you talked about Airbnb, I could relate with them and understand that how real they are. Maybe some people who are just beginning into, so PMs who are just getting into product management and looking at these things, maybe looking at that, oh, these are just big words about values, about thinking about the user. I can guarantee that like all those things are so true for anybody who's building products. So thank you so much, Mona. I think these are very relevant. Now let's jump to questions. We have quite a lot of questions. So we'll get going with the first question from Rajiv Gupta. Rajiv, you want to ask your question? Well, Rajiv is here, I know.
Should I read out the question?
It says that regarding folks stuck in B2B or B2C based on the first few opportunities, how could industry change? How could industry change to allow people to shift gears? I mean, product management principles do not change dramatically.
Yeah. So, this is a question that I often get asked. And one of the things I want to say is that when I think about skilling, I think about foundation. I think about giving you the foundational skills to think about problem statements and frameworks, and being capable of actually applying it in different contexts, right? So that is what skilling means. When you think about B2B to B2C, I think there's definitely some clear differences in product management because of three key reasons. One is how products are built, the time frames, right? In B2C, people build, execute, iterate, and get gratification very quickly. Versus in B2B, those sales cycles are longer, implementation is longer. The feedback you get from the customers comes from many sales channels, marketers, stuff like that, right? So what you learn is not as direct as what you can learn in B2C. But at the same time, I'd say 70% remains the same. And then if you have the right foundational skills, you can actually very easily transition from B2B to B2C. But I will say that it's easier to go from B2B to B2C than it is to go from B2C to B2B because of the personality traits. People that get in B2C get very used to instant gratification and being able to learn very quickly of whatever they think, whatever their hypotheses are. When they go into the B2B segment, they start to struggle slightly because, like I said, the cycles are longer. So something to be mindful about, but I don't think that the skill sets are dramatically different. I think 70 to 80% remains the same. As long as your foundation is strong, you can apply it in either context.
Shruti Sharma?
Yeah, hi Mona. I think there was a question in between. So basically, you were mentioning that when the first Android app went live, it went live in Cuba. Now, I'm curious because a lot of US-based companies, when they go live with a test of something that they build, they either go with Colombia or with Mexico, which seems like a better fit. Something we've discovered with Facebook dating and others. Why pick Cuba? I mean, is there a
actually
relevance, or is there the economy isn't what Colombia and Mexico can offer? The demography isn't probably the same. Hence the curiosity.
Yeah. Good question. Actually, maybe there was a slight misunderstanding. So what I was trying to say, or at least what was my intent of showing it on the slide was the different aspects that happened in that year. One of which was launched an Android app, and the second was also launched in Cuba. Cuba was actually a historic moment for the US because there were travel sanctions for the longest time for US citizens to go to Cuba.
Yes.
And when Obama lifted that, we were the first travel hospitality company that got dibs into that. Also because Cuba itself doesn't actually have travel industry so evolved. They don't really have that many hotels. So the host and the culture was something that really kind of appealed to the Airbnb ecosystem. So that was sort of one of the growth moments that drove growth for us.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because I think that
good question and good curiosity.
Thank you.
Yes.
Utkarsh?
Yeah, hi Mona, thank you so much for the session. It was really amazing. My question is, when you are venturing into a new city or a new country, what did Airbnb focus on? More on the guest side or more on the host side?
So, unlike a lot of other companies, there is no such thing as entering a city for Airbnb. And I'll tell you why, which is the point I was making around cross-pollination, right? So how did we even go from US to Europe? The way we went from US to Europe is, there were three kids living in New York. Their parents lived in Europe. They came to New York to visit them and they stayed in an Airbnb. And when they went back, the kids told their parents that, hey, you should actually open up your home for other strangers because you're an empty nester. And suddenly now we were an international company because this host just put their place up on Airbnb in Europe, right? So there was like a natural organic way of growth geographically for us. So it wasn't like we had a plan. So if you kind of compare us to Uber, we have slightly different ways of thinking, right? So in Uber, you actually have to enter a city. So every city has to have a plan. Versus at Airbnb, it wasn't like that because, like I said, this cross-pollination happened, right? People just travel in itself is just a global problem statement to begin with. People don't travel in their own city; they just travel elsewhere. But having said that, when do you start to focus on a specific city? That decision was actually, we had a magic number, which was 100 listings. So if we got to 100 organic listings, we would actually, as a team, as a growth team, sit down and put down a plan on what are some localization, marketing, brand, storytelling efforts needed in that city to kind of bump up our listings. And the second magic number was when we got to about 1,500 listings is when we started to actually do a lot of the trust and verification efforts in there. So we would actually proactively go in there and actually do lots of things that were fully localized to that country, to that city.
Understand. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Hey, Mona. I have a couple of questions. One on the Airbnb core product side. So it kind of makes competition and hotels irrelevant, right? I mean, not it's kind of drives users from hotels to NHAs, right? So considering that, was there any acquisition proposal from hotels or traditional OTAs initially, or down the line somewhere? Because I work for Booking Holdings, and it was a duopoly mainly with Booking and Expedia, right? At some point, there must be someone approaching you to acquire Airbnb. Did that happen?
Yeah, so I wouldn't know if there was an acquisition offer, to be very honest with you, but I will say that there were definitely lots of hotels that lobbied at government levels to block Airbnb stays. So the first regulation, if you follow the big legal battle in New York for Airbnb, it was actually hotels feeling the threat of all business going to Airbnb, and then lobbying, saying that the rental price in the city has shot up because most people don't want to rent it out for longer term. They want to keep it at Airbnb because they're getting a lot of demand from Airbnb, and so the locals are not able to find rental apartments and they have to pay higher prices. And so I don't know if you know, but Airbnb also acquired Hotel Tonight. So we now actually have hotels on the platform for overnight stays if you need one. So yeah, I mean, I definitely think, and just in terms of the number of beds we are bigger than the biggest hotel chain. So I mean, there's definitely the sense of competition, right? And you can also see from providers like Expedia or Priceline or whatever, they've started doing alternate accommodations, right? Because they all understand that there is demand going that direction as well. So yeah, I don't know if there's been an offer. I'm assuming even if there was, it was no. We are still privately held. So here we are.
Right.
Yes.
I have one more question. So
Yes.
NHAs was Airbnb's core business, right? But then a couple of years back, I don't remember exactly when, they acquired Hotel Tonight, and now they're into hotels. And after this COVID, they were pulling back from hotels. Do you think that was a distraction for Airbnb as a whole, or what is your take on that?
No, I don't think there was a distraction. I think this is going back to the first secret ingredient that I talked about, which is, know what your users are looking for and how they're using the product, right? The reason of going to Hotel Tonight was we saw a surge in business travel. And typically business travel is booked in shorter terms, right? So it's like I want to go for business travel on Thursday, but I'm booking my ticket on a Tuesday. And Airbnb in its generic model didn't cater to that product. So even if we had Divakar as a user who was using Airbnb for other things, when he wanted to use it for business, we just didn't have the right supply for him. Which is why we even acquired Hotel Tonight in the first place. So I don't think it was a distraction. I think the point of deprioritizing hotels is just because nobody is living in hotels these days because of COVID. But deprioritizing doesn't mean that we're not going to get back to it. I mean, I think it's just, I don't think it was a distraction. I think it's a fairly strategic move with a very thought out sort of what the outcome is.
Right, in a way, it's trying to become a full-fledged OTA, right?
Yeah, see, again, like I think the lens at which how Airbnb looks at it is slightly different. Like I said, it's always what the user needs and can be solved for that need, right? So ultimately, with all those needs, we may become an OTA plus something else, plus something else, plus something else. But it never starts by saying, I want to become an OTA, so let's do whatever all OTAs are doing.
Yeah. Let's go.
Okay, Shobit, Saxena, and let's stick to one question, please. If we have a long list, if we are done with all, then we can come back and do the second question. But request you to please stick to one question. Shobit, Saxena, are you there? He's asking what product process was followed in Airbnb. Is it more like Amazon where write-ups have to be written, or more short user story? A very deep execution level question.
Yes. Again, it was dependent on what the product or the project was. If it is an optimization, then it's mostly kind of, what is the expected effort, impact, result, and how, like what is the urgency of that. But it was sort of a moonlighting project. Then it typically starts with a lot of user research. It first starts by talking to users that we are trying to target, tries to learn from what their gaps are, has a whole team of user researchers that just kind of put pen and paper sketches, low fidelity mockups together, get some validation on it, and then kind of go from there. So we never worked on a moonlight product where it was like, okay, Brian wants this, so we are just going to start building it. It just never happened. So that was sort of the product process.
Makes sense. Gopala?
Yeah. Hi, Mona. Thanks for the talk. You talked about hundreds of experiments. Can you kind of give a couple of examples? That's one. I also wanted to understand on the Upraised part where, how do you plan to scale that up? Because it seems like a more people-driven thing that you are doing, because to train someone, to upskill them, there needs to be a lot of people involved. How do you plan to scale that up?
Sure. So the first question, what was your first question you said?
Experiments at Airbnb.
Yeah, examples are, I mean, I don't even know where to begin, but everything from like changing the image on the homepage. If you're in India versus when you're in the US, you see different faces, to more deeper ones around pricing. So it's based on how much demand is in the market. Like it ties to like a global event database. Like is there a spike in demand? To something very small, like just a video of how we explain what Airbnb does. We've done, I think there's like 100+ versions of that video before we even launched it. So we actually experimented a lot with it. So there's experiments of all types. Coming to Upraised, I hope I have the scaling problem, which will be a good problem to solve. But right now I'm in sort of the phase of trying to, like I said, figure out what the ideal world looks like and then kind of work backwards from it. So far, we've been able to actually do it fairly well. I think of Upraised as a problem statement that's at the intersection of psychology, technology, and behavior, right? So upskilling is as much about understanding how somebody learns, and how somebody is motivated to learn, to actually teaching them what they need to learn, right? And so with a combination of, so like I said, we're a team of 10 people, all of us are product tech, and we built a fairly, I would think I'm fairly proud of what we've built. So you guys should check it out and let me know if the product works or doesn't work. But most parts of the product are actually fairly scalable. So we're building it as a platform. Our ambition is not to limit ourselves to just product management. The objective is to go from develop an expertise on how we do product management to then go to design, to then go to data science, to then go to growth, performance marketing, so on and so forth, right? So I don't know how else to kind of explain how we're scaling it, but there's lots of details to it. But
small follow-up is, how do you plan to use tech in all of this process?
You should find out yourself. Use the app. Tell me what do you think about it.
Sure, I'll do that. Yeah.
Yes, love to hear your feedback.
Yeah, thanks, Mona.
Yes, absolutely.
This was more of a VC question, but I'm sure you're prepared for all of them. So
not really. I just say what I feel like. I just say what is true. Like I'm not making anything up.
That's the easy thing to do. And
yes.
If you have to do the other way, then you have to.
You have to prepare. Yes.
Okay, Achal Garg.
Hi Mona, thanks for the chat. So yeah, my question is actually an extension to what Gopala asked. My question revolves around, you told learnings were a great thing. If it's a failure, it's a failure. No worries. But as long as you learn, it's a win. So could you share a couple of learnings from your failed experiments and give us a bit more details about the experiment, if that's possible?
We can connect offline on that. I think that's a very detailed question. It's hard to kind of, I don't want you to misinterpret the learning and kind of take something and apply in your context. But for example, one of the examples was we all believed that in the referral program, if you give people more money, there will be higher conversion. Actually, there is a sweet spot at which uh, increasing the amount makes sense, after which it actually, you just give more money without any higher conversion. So we kept increasing it to a point where, we ran an experiment and we realized that at 20% less money, we were getting the same number of users. So it was a failed experiment on our part to keep increasing it. But it was highly celebrated because, we kind of learned a very intriguing user psychology aspect around, what drives people to actually even refer to their friends.
Perfect. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Rishi Panda.
Yes, so Divakar, I think my question has already been answered by Mona. So I would like to just change my question. Like, Mona, what are the difference you would find between a product ops role and a full-fledged PM roles, and how can one transition?
So I would say a product ops role is more like a project manager, and a product manager role is, more tightly tied to product per se, right? Again, if your product is actually an operations product or a logistics product, then likely the lines are slightly more blurred. But how do you transition? So look, in my point of view, the way I kind of think about transitions is less about what your past background is. It is more about what your skill set is and where your gaps are. And one of the key things that we work on at Upraised is to kind of shy away from focusing too much on what your past is, rather focus on highlighting what your skill set is and how that skill set is applicable to the new job that you're looking at. And that's basically how we help you transition. So if you were to transition, let's say, like taking an example of Arvind, right? He was an early member at Ninja Cart. He was hired as a product manager at Ninja Cart, but his role was actually a product ops person because Ninja Cart as a product itself is very operations heavy. For him to transition, we looked at his skill set and we realized that one of the key strengths that he needs to, one of the key skills he needs to focus on is developing product sensibility, right? So how do you differentiate between a good product and a bad product, and what does it take to actually build a good product? And so we kind of upskilled him on that, and we were able to get him placed in a very product manager, product focused role at Simple. So that's basically, does this answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah, but then I just like, from my question was predominantly like, is a PM role a natural progression from a product operations role, or both are completely different? Or
they are an extension, but I wouldn't say like most product ops people end up in product manager roles, if that is your question.
Yeah.
But I also don't think that just because you've done product ops you cannot become a product manager.
Okay.
Yeah.
In India, we've seen many times that people get stuck in semantics. You might
Correct.
do a product ops role while your designation is product manager, or vice versa, or something else.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the problems I might face. Like I do a lot of ops kind of related work, like just as you mentioned about the other student. Yeah. So, but then officially it's a PM role. So that's
Yeah.
I'm worried about, like whether I'll be able to have that progression.
No, you can absolutely progress, and you can absolutely transition into more product focused role if that's what you desire.
Yeah.
The key is to understand where your gaps are and what you need to fill to get there.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much, Mona. That was an amazing session. I've been following you since you spoke on IBM podcast for the first time. So thank you so much for all the insights so far. So my question was around the product teams and growth teams in B2C startups. So what I've observed so far in my whatever experience I've had in the product management space is that there are two teams, product teams and growth teams, and there is fair bit of friction is what I've observed. And when I've spoken to other people from other companies, that's what I've heard as their main problem. So how did you, so first of all, was there a distinction in Airbnb? If yes, then how did you guys work around that, and how the team structure was maintained, how feature prioritization worked in that case?
So your question is if there is friction between growth and product teams, right? And how do
Correct.
you
So
resolve that?
yes, and how feature prioritization works in that case, because growth teams come up with some insights from the experiments, and then product team has its own agenda of building some sort of features and all of that, right? So was there?
Uh, so so at Airbnb we were structured slightly differently. Like I said, uh, I think one of the fundamental differences in the thought process, which I have also talked about very widely, is that product is equal to growth, right? I don't think there is a large distinction between product and growth. And so internally also at Airbnb, the way we were structured was every team was responsible for a different part of the funnel. And because we were responsible for the top part of the funnel, we were called the growth team, because majority of the growth was just growth. The way we defined growth was just people trying a product for the first time. So how can we get more people to try a product for the first time? Uh, in terms of prioritization, we, like I said, because we were uniquely structured where every initiative had designers, engineers, product manager, and a data scientist, the prioritization actually was driven by, ultimately what metric does it move and how urgently do we need to move this metric. So there was less friction in terms of, growth sat at the top of the funnel. A lot of the other teams, which also had product managers, so there was no difference. There was no growth team and product team. There was growth team, which was at the top of the funnel. There was a search team that was at the second layer of the funnel. There was a payments team, which was at the bottom of the funnel, and each of them had product managers, designers, engineers, and data scientists. So product was all across the board. Design was all across the board. Engineering was all across the board. Data science was all across the board. And the way the prioritization worked was mostly driven by metrics and what we were trying to move. There was always a North Star metric we were trying to chase, and at a higher level, product managers were responsible for making sure that information from different parts of the funnel was communicated more frequently, more transparently, more fluently, so that there were no surprises. So if we change something in growth that we thought was going to have an impact on payments, then we need to let them know in advance before that's prioritized. So those were happening at more sort of leadership level conversations, so keeping everybody on the same macro picture. But product design and data science was all across the board. We were just working on different parts of the funnel. They were not separate teams.
Understood. Thank you so much, Mona.
Yeah.
So Akshay's question is that in a B2C context, while is it possible for founders or PMs to talk to the users and get first-hand feedback during the early days, it might not be feasible once the product has large number of users with varying personas. How does a PM go about seeking feedback and validation for features at such stages?
Firstly, I don't agree with that at all. Actually, at 750 million users at Airbnb, there is still, for every new feature set, we actually have user research teams go out in the market and talk to users. Actually, the more you scale, the easier it is for you to talk to users, because you can find more of them. When you are very small, it's very difficult for you to find the 100 users that are your users, because sometimes your sign up is way down the funnel. You don't know who's using your product. Getting in touch with them, having their willingness to actually help you, all these things are much harder when you're earlier in the process. It's much easier when you're later in the process at scale. So I think it's sort of a mindset problem. I think a lot of people think now we're at 50 million users, kaise baat karenge isse? It's actually literally just like I almost want to challenge you and say, just right now, if you just tweet and say, anybody who's using my product, I want to talk to you, I'm pretty sure on Twitter you will get 5 people volunteer to talk to you, and you can just talk to them and get feedback. So I actually think that the more scale you have, the easier it is to get to. How do you but like you said, it's important to know which user persona you're talking to and what kind of feedback what should you make of that feedback. That is something that the user research team generally specializes in, which is why it's very much required at a certain scale to actually have a very dedicated user research team.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, so with more users, you also have more resources. You can afford to invest in a user research team, and people are already talking about you. So even without you going out and finding users, you can, as she said, you can go to Twitter and people will be talking about your product.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Okay, so we move to the next question. Pallav Jawar. So Pallav is asking, values is something that we talked about a lot, but it's very hard to evaluate in an interview. Were there any frameworks that you use to evaluate values of potential hires?
Yes, they were. And you're right. It's very hard to interview. It's very hard to evaluate in an interview. It's even harder to actually let go of people when they don't meet core values, but they are great from a capability standpoint, right? So typically an interview process always spends significant amount of time, maybe 3, 4, 5 rounds of interviews to figure out the capability of a candidate. And when they all tick off, but they don't tick off in the core values, it's very, very difficult for us as a company, for any company to say no, right? Because you want capable people. So how do you fight that? So at Airbnb, one of the things that was done was actually when we hit about 100 people, we actually had a 3-day offsite training for every single person that was going to be an interviewer for a core value interview, to actually standardize how we ask questions. What are we supposed to ask? What are we not supposed to ask? When we ask certain questions, what biases can we look for versus what biases we should not look for? So it's sort of like a 3-day core training that happened once every quarter. And so the framework that was used was being very clear. Firstly, for the first day and a half, we only focused on what each of these core values actually are, right? And as a team player, we did exercises to understand how to exhibit this core value. So if I am talking to somebody and the core values be a host, how do I evaluate it? So for example, one of the evaluation questions we had at Airbnb was a coffee test. Okay, so if you could have a candidate come for an interview, he takes a cup of coffee, we sit on a table, we have a conversation, and the interview ends. Do they actually leave the coffee cup on the table, or do they put it back in the place from where they're supposed to put it back? Do they just assume somebody else will clean up after them, or do they actually do it themselves, right? There were many such small things that we used to look for. It was very detail oriented. It required a lot of thought process, and it was very painful sometimes because we had to say no to candidates that were great from a capability standpoint. But I think first is, if I were to just sort of make a gist of the framework, the first is even like understand fully what your core value is. Second is, because of these core values, what are your expected behaviors? And then having a standardized list of questions to test for those expected behaviors so that you know whether they are yes or no.
Trinisha?
Yeah. Hi, Mona. Thanks for sharing your insights with us. My question was partly covered by the question that Piyush had asked. Basically, it was about how um, at Airbnb, how do you approach a growth statement? But building on it, so you said that as a problem statement, the problem statement of the growth team is worked on at Airbnb was to find out, like, to solve it for first time users. But even when you talk about first time users from an Airbnb perspective, you have people trying out the product as hosts who are onboarded to Airbnb for the first time, and you also have guests trying to book on Airbnb for the first time. So then is growth tackled, like, is there a separate host product team which looks into that, or a guest product team, or is there like an overarching leadership who decides how to prioritize this?
There's definitely a separate guest and host team now. But back then, when I started, no, we didn't have a specific team for the longest time. We kind of look at both sides of the funnel. Now, obviously, we just have a lot of guests and a lot of hosts, and so they require different levels of localization and different challenges. Having said that, they still fall under the same team because, like I said, there is a large portion of guests that become host and vice versa, which means that as a product, we have to set the right expectations, and which means that we have to have a single point of view. So it has to fall under one team. So yeah, it did fall under one team, except that there's an overarching team, but there are two separate divisions who focus on both sides of the funnel separately.
All right, thank you.
Shashwat Verma?
Hello. Yeah. It was a very nice session, Mona, first of all. And I think my question is slightly on the Airbnb side, which is now in a post-COVID world, how does the landscape look like for Airbnb? Yeah.
This is like astrology question. I don't know. I don't know when is COVID ending. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. But I will say that some initial numbers look very promising. It feels like it looks like the domestic travel volume in the US is higher than what it was last year in the summer at the same time, because now more people are actually traveling domestically because they're afraid of getting on a flight, but they still want to get away. Secondly, even the domestic business in Europe seems to be back up. But who knows? Time will tell. Like I said, this feels more like an astrology question.
No. I mean, from a user behavior perspective, if you really think like, if there is a certain fear that has been like, let's say, forced in everyone, from a point of view where you're going to a stranger's house compared to when you're going to a professional survey. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, there are some pros and cons. Look, I think in the post-COVID world, most people are going to be very stressed about living in a place where there is close contact with a lot of strangers, right? Which is what happens in hotel rooms, right? You're living next to, like, you're not even barely 6 feet different distance to somebody who you don't know where they've come from, or you have no understanding of who they are, versus living in an apartment all by yourself, where what happens and what has gone in. But on the other hand, hotels have consistent standards of standardization and cleaning and whatnot, which means that Airbnb will have to kind of focus on up that part of their game. The third is, I think this behavior is definitely applicable for a lot of business travel, at least in the post-COVID world. But for leisure travel, I think that Airbnb is probably better suited to kind of come back up, because people are looking to get away to more remote places. People are looking to get away where there's less density, and typically hotels are not built in less dense areas. They're typically built in very high dense touristy places. Most of the vacation rental or the second home properties are more saturated on Airbnb than any other platform. So I'm fairly hopeful that in about a year we should start to see the business come back up.
Okay, Ashish, you had a question. Ashish wanted to ask, how do you apply to Upraised? Is there any cohort thing, or is it a continuous admission thing? I think she'll ask you to check the website. But
no, but yeah, we are. It's a continuous thing. It is a customized learning journey for you. The relationship on Upraised is Upraised and you. It is not, your journey is going to be unique than Divakar's journey, than Mona's journey. So it's dependent on what you're good at and what your gaps are. So there is no such thing as cohort starts on June 9th and everybody goes to the same program. It is, you can start today and get going.
Okay, so one last question, Mona. I
Yeah.
think you had put this. I don't see him here. A very fair question that, speaking of diversity, I see very few women in this call as well. Any thoughts on how do we go about building gender balance in product creation and product profession? It's a very fair question right now.
Yes. Yeah, and especially as being the first female engineer in many places, I feel like this is something that is very dear to me. And actually, one of the big inspirations of how and why I wanted to do Upraised was and help people with career transitions was I realized that actually a lot of women leave the workforce when at about 4 or 5 year mark, because they're stuck in professions they don't like. They are stuck in jobs they don't want to be in, and they really struggle to transition. And this is one of the key reasons why people drop out and labor participation rates dramatically drop when you get to a 5 year experience mark. So that was one of my key reasons of starting Upraised, and I'm really hoping that we can get it to a scale where there is a meaningful side impact of this. But more tactically, if you think about it today, I think that first is kind of just awareness, right? That there is no diversity today, right? I don't think people are ready to even acknowledge that. When I tell people that even in a 10% team, we have gender diversity and a balance of 60% women and 40% men, they're somewhat shocked. So it's one of those things where if you are aware, you will figure out a way to solve it. But it's always, the counter argument is always, I'm not going to make I'm not going to go out and look for women and be okay to find people that are subpar or sub-talented to kind of just make up for the diversity question. But I think that's a wrong assumption to start with. I don't know why you're assuming that you're doing a favor to a woman to actually get them hired. But at the same time, it takes a point of view to say that I want to focus on it so that you go seeking for it. So I think first is just awareness. I think a lot of, I wish more people spoke about it. And more companies thought of it not as a charter to just kind of tick some boxes, but genuinely because, it's, and especially in product, it's sad because you're building products, which is 50%, where your audience is 50% men and 50% women. Like if you are building for that audience, how can you not have product people be part of that team? Like there has to be representation. Like you can't build a product for tier 3 and all the people on your team are tier 1 people. Like doesn't work. Like you're not going to get very far. Just the same way, like I just don't understand how you can build you can build a women's product with a very lean women contribution in that product. So I think one is awareness. I think more people should openly talk about it. The second is I think there is just a lot of biases that work against women, and I think for example, and a lot of these biases actually come from women as well. So I've been in these 72 meetings that I've gone to, working with companies. One of the big questions I constantly kept hearing was, oh, we don't give appraisals to women who are sort of in their 27, 28 frame because they're typically, still thinking about starting families, or they quickly relocate or do whatever, right? And this is an HR person in a big tech organization talking about it. And that is just shocking. Like, you are a woman yourself. Like, how can you be saying this? So I think part of the problem is women themselves. I think that it is a very big assumption to make that a woman at 27 is not ambitious. And it is also a very big assumption to make that they are just going to start a family. Like, this is again astrology. Like, you can sit there and tell me like you're going to get pregnant at 20, but like, no, it doesn't work like that. So I think that's one of the other things. And then I think that
it's their choice. It should not be a reason for not hiring.
And to follow that up, it is also a very big assumption to say that if you do start a family, you are less productive.
Exactly. And it's
actually, yeah, I'll tell you, I have a 4.5-year-old child, and I will tell you that actually having that child is forcing me to be 10 times more productive than I was before, because I know that I have a finite amount of time to dedicate and I need to make every minute worthwhile. Also, the kinds of things I want to work on, I am highly selective, because the downside is I'm not spending time with my child. So the bar for what I work on is very high. So I think there are many assumptions that go in, and I think these are myths that need to be broken, and more people need to speak about it. And I think one of the other downsides that I find in this whole ecosystem is this whole women tech conferences. I just find them to be like the worst place to talk about it, because only women show up, and they are not the part of the problem completely. So unless there is a more comprehensive engagement from other side, there's no solution to this problem. We can all sit there and lament and talk about like how bad it is, but that doesn't get us anywhere. So I think firstly, like, we should just rename and rebrand women tech conferences to just conferences and have everybody join, and then talk about women issues, because I think this branding just limits it to women showing up, and then they all feel sorry for each other, but that doesn't solve the problem.
So rightly put, and I hope we can all contribute whatever we can from our side to solve this. But there's a big problem, and as you rightly said, the first step is to at least acknowledge it, which is not.
Correct.
Thank you so much, Mona. This has been amazing.
Thanks, guys. Thanks everyone for coming on a Saturday evening when you guys could be doing a lot of other things. Hopefully, I've made your time worthwhile. You can reach me at mona@upraised.co or at Mona Gandhi on Twitter. Happy to take any follow-up questions if you guys have. And do give Praise a try. I'd love to get your feedback. You guys are literally the target audience.
Can we have a big round of applause for her? We can only just mute and clap.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thanks, Devakar, for having me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.